Good evening. This is Pastor Bob Uzzle from the Bethel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Corsicana, Texas. Anyone who knows me well can tell you that for many years, one of my major interests, in fact, outside the church, the institution that's been most important in my life, it's not more important than the church, not by any stretch of the imagination, but an organization that I dearly love is the Masonic Lodge. And today I want to pay tribute to a beloved institution where I got my start in Masonry 47 years ago. I'm speaking of Waco Lodge number 92, Ancient, Free, and Accepted Masons. Waco Lodge number 92 is the oldest organization of any kind in continuous existence in my hometown of Waco. It was chartered on January the 23rd of 1852. At the time, it was known as Bosque Lodge, number 92. The name was selected because the Bosque River, which converges with the Brazos River just above Waco, not far from the town of Bosqueville. Literally, bosque means a place of thickets. The original charter was issued to Bosque Lodge number 92 on January 23rd, 1852, and it was 3 years later, under the leadership of Worshipful Master Joseph W. Spate, the decision to change the name was made. The dispensation to change the name was granted by the Grand Lodge meeting in San Antonio. And on January the 26th, 1855, it became Waco Lodge number 92. And it's had that name ever since. I mentioned Joseph Warren Spate was his full name. He served as Worshipful Master for a total of 16 years. He came to Waco from Mississippi, where he had served as Grand Master while only 26 years of age. He arrived in January of 1854, affiliated with 92, was elected Worshipful Master from the floor the same month. At the outbreak of the Civil War, he organized the 15th Texas Infantry Regiment and reached the rank of colonel. He returned to Waco after the war, and his previous wealth was largely gone. It did not stop his zeal for Waco Lodge and for the community. He was very active in the Baptist Church, the city of Waco, and Baylor University, as well as the Grand Lodge. He's buried in Oakwood Cemetery in Waco, as are a lot of famous people. And a major street in South Waco is Spade Avenue. And it's my understanding that much of his property in that area eventually formed the campus of Baylor University. And Baylor, by the way, and I have 3 degrees from Baylor, BA, MA, and PhD. So, as I've often said, I've spent enough time on the Baylor campus to own some of it. But unfortunately, I don't. Baylor was originally located in Independence, Texas. In 1861, Dr. Rufus C. Burleson resigned as president of Baylor and came to Waco to become the president of Waco University. And he brought the entire male faculty with him, including Dr. D.R. Wallace, a pioneer Texas psychiatrist. And both Burleson and Wallace became members of Waco Lodge number 92. In fact, Burleson And it was in 1886 that Baylor moved from Independence to Waco and actually merged with Waco University. And Burleson at that point became Baylor president. There is a statue of him on the Baylor campus. He had quite a long and distinguished career as a pastor and as an educator. And Dr. Burleson was chaplain of Waco Lodge number 92 for 40 plus years. I have many fond memories from my time at Baylor. I feel like I got a very good education there. Some long-term friendships I've maintained. One thing I dislike about Baylor, however, is that they are very reluctant to hire their doctoral graduates. I know from experience. And there's a statement I'm very serious about this. This will probably never happen. But I wish the spirit of Rufus C. Burleson would return and tell them to give me a job. I would sure appreciate that. But Burleson was certainly a great man. There was a lot of great men came through that lodge. There were actually 3 governors of Texas that came through Waco Lodge number 92. All from Waco. There was Richard Koch. I mentioned Dr. D.R. Wallace a while ago. They considered themselves friends for eternity. There's pictures, there's statues of the 2 men facing each other in Oakwood Cemetery. Dr. Wallace was the first superintendent of Terrell State Hospital, where I worked as a social worker from 1981 to 1986. And it was in 1985 when they had their centennial year, since they admitted their first patients in 1885. I was on the Centennial Celebration Committee, and I managed to secure a picture of the statue of Dr. Wallace at Oakwood Cemetery, and it was placed, it was blown up and placed in the Heritage Room on the Terrell State Hospital campus. And by the way, I learned a lot during my 5 years working in the psychiatric facility. Two other governors came from Waco. There was Saul Ross and Pat Neff, who was later president of Baylor. Richard Koch, Saul Ross, and Pat Neff were all members of Waco 92. There was a 4th governor who also came from Waco, and I met her on more than one occasion. Yes, to be a Mason, you must be a man. So Ann Richards was not able to be a member, but her father, the late Brother Cecil Willis, a very fine man whom I knew personally, was also a member of Waco 92. Many of the early movers and shakers of Waco, who did much to develop my hometown, were members of Waco Lodge number 92. My father was not a Mason, but when I was a teenager, I was invited to a D. Malay Rush Party. D. Malay is the junior Masonic order, founded in Kansas City, Missouri, March 18, 1919, by Brother Frank S. Land, a remarkable man, named for Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master of the Knights Templar, who was burned at the stake as a martyr to fidelity and toleration on March 18, 1314. But I was initiated into de Molay on September 26, 1967, Waco chapter. In 1970, I worked my way up and served in the spring as master counselor. Quite an experience. And I've maintained an interest in this ever since. That's what got me interested in masonry. And on the night of my initiation, I was introduced to a man. I regarded him as an old man, but he was no more older than I am now. Things do change over time. Very fine man by the name of George Norris. Brother Norris had retired from the Missouri, Kansas, Texas Railroad. And he retired from the railroad, and he didn't become a Mason until he was about 65. And he went on and eventually took the higher degrees, the Scottish Rite and the Shrine, all very interesting organizations. But Brother Norris, we stayed in touch. He monitored my progress. When I became a DMLA, I was in my junior year at Waco High. I graduated in 1969 and went on and spent 2 years at McLennan Community College before transferring to Baylor as a ministerial student. And as he knew, Brother Norris knew when I was going to be 21. And he called me and told me we need to get that petition in. So we did. And I turned 21 on May 22nd, 1972. And then on August 21st, 1972, I received the degree of Veteran Apprentice. Now, not only did Brother Norris sign my petition, he even paid my fees. I'll never forget that. I'll always be grateful for that. In the Blue Lodge, you have 3 degrees: Entered Apprentice, Fellow Craft, and Master Mason. And if you cannot take the 2nd degree unless you memorize a lengthy catechism related to the 1st degree. And then you cannot take the 3rd degree until you memorize a catechism related to the 2nd. You can't take any of the higher degrees or serve in any other capacity in the lodge unless you've mastered the work of the 3rd degree. And so I had to go to class. It took me a little while. You can actually do each one in 30 days if you have the time. But in 1972, I was a senior at Baylor carrying a full academic load. I was also in my first pastorate in Whitney, Texas. So with a pastorate and full academic load, my time to study the work was limited. But I eventually got through it and passed my proficiency. December 19th, 1972, I received my 2nd degree, Fellowcraft. And then on March 20th, 1973, at Waco 92, I was raised to the sublime of a Master Mason. And quite an experience. They say Waco 92 was founded in 1852. 1952, when I was just a year old, this book was published. A Century of Fraternity. Waco Lodge number 92, AF and AM, Waco, Texas, 1852 to 1952. The author is a man that I met on a number of occasions. His name was Roger Conger. And On July 1st, 1990, he autographed this book. He described it as a labor of love for Bob Uzzell, friend and brother, Roger N. Conger, past master, Waco 92, 1958. I don't know how many books Brother Conger wrote. He knew more about the history of Waco and McLennan County than anyone during his day. He passed away a number of years ago, and I remember attending a reception a few years before his death, and a longtime Waco librarian made a statement that when an old man dies, it's like a library burning down. I firmly believe that. And that's why it's so important to record our history, our families, our churches, our lodges, our schools, all of our institutions. And like I say, my home lodge is very special to me. I've been a part of a lot of other lodges over the years and written and published a great deal about Freemasonry. And I must admit that sometimes what I've written has not been altogether that flattering, because nobody's perfect. No institution is perfect. There was a number of years in which I had little contact with Waco 92, but all that's been worked out. I thank God for that. In 1976, August 27th, I took a prophetic journey. At the time, I was living in Teague, Texas, and I was beginning my career in the ministry of the African Methodist Episcopal Church. I had joined the church in 1975, spent a week in Austin, was ordained, but did not receive an appointment. Well, I met with our bishop. He told me to meet him at the Northeast Texas Annual Conference in Bonham. So I agreed to. That was August 27th, 1976. Took a prophetic journey. I drove from my apartment in Teague, through Fairfield, through Corsicana, where I now live, through Ennis, and I stopped in Kaufman, bought gas. Never been to Ennis or Kaufman before prior to that time. Then drove through Terrell and Greenville into a little town called Wolf City, stopped and had breakfast, drove to Bonham. When I got to Bonham, I learned I was being sent to a church in Dallas because the presiding elder there wanted me on his district. Well, the reason I call this a prophetic journey, I didn't realize it at the time, but in the future, I would be pastor for 8 years in Kaufman, for 14 years in Ennis. I've been in Corsicana nearly 4 years, and God willing, I hope to retire from my present pastor at Bethel when I reach the church's mandatory retirement age in 2026. But when I got to Bonham, I'd made arrangements to stay there that weekend in that area. And I didn't stay in Bonham. I stayed in Denison, which is not far from there. And made a trip over the border into Durant, Oklahoma. And by the way, that's a long time before Choctaw Casino was built. And I don't have any interest in gambling anyway. But I had I hope to see Brother Norris, because see, he had, as I said earlier, he had retired from the MKT Railroad, Missouri, Kansas, and Texas. He lived in Waco, but he was he had been going back and forth to the MKT hospital in Denison. He finally sold his house in Waco and moved to Denison. And I had we talked on the phone a time or two. I had talked about going to see him. I never got around to it. I now regret that. But I thought this would be a good time to kill two birds with one stone. Well, I was up there for the meeting and at preaching that Sunday at Quinn Chapel, and I went by Brother Norris' house. Nobody was there. So I went to the MKT hospital. And sadly, this was the second day. It was the day I'd stayed over that night, and this was August 28th of 1976. And just 10 days, or no, 20 days earlier, it was on August the 8th that Brother Norris had passed away there in Denison. Someone he would have loved to have seen me. I would have loved to have seen him. But I'll always be grateful for him to helping me get my start in masonry. I've written 4 books so far. 2 of them deal with Masonic subjects. Many articles I've written related to masonry and related topics. It's all got to start somewhere, and in my case, it started in Waco, 92. I was raised on March the 20th of 1973. It was on April the 20th, 1973, 47 years ago today, that I went to the Waco 92 and passed my proficiency exam in the work of the Master Mason degree. That was Good Friday. If you've listened to any of my other broadcasts, you know Good Friday is very special to me. I had not gotten in the habit of going to church and fasting all day. And several years later, I adopted that and still doing that, but I hadn't gotten into that yet. I was 21 going on 22 when all that happened. So many things became a part of my life later, but being a Christian is very important to me. I grew up Baptist, been African Methodist since 1975, but denominations are not as important as relationship with God as revealed in Jesus Christ. But next to the church, I love the Masonic Order. And I want to thank God for Waco 92, my beloved institution.